Callie Finn, it's so good to see you again today, but I hate that we're here to talk about stalking and player safety around women's basketball. Uh, we actually spoke yesterday because we were talking about free agency and all kinds of things. And while we were actually recording those conversations, there was news breaking over the day about a Texas man who had been charged with stalking the Indiana Fever's Caitlin Clark. And it's really frightening when you hear some of the details because it started online and he was saying things and the commentary got worse and worse. Some of it was sexual in nature,
Some of it
um,
violent.
violent, yes. And then he traveled uh, to that area, um, and that is apparently when Caitlin Clark got really nervous and scared. And I'm paraphrasing, but it made her really uncomfortable. She did speak to the police. She did speak, to authorities about it. So much so as even it was reported that she changed her patterns in terms of like where she goes and how she moves, things like that. I guess not to be easily detectable or to be followed or things like that. And no person should have to live and conduct their life like that, in fear of violence or anything like that. And the irony in this is that it's actually National Stalking Awareness Month. And this month is celebrated in January to raise awareness about stalking and its warning signs. The month also honors survivors of stalking and works to prevent future incidents. So, uh, don't want to have to talk about this, but we are because it's an issue that affects many women. Nearly 1 in 3 women have experienced stalking victimization at some point in their life. 1 in 3, Callie. And so, unfortunately, Caitlin Clark is one of the 1 in 3. Paige Bueckers recently, not too long ago, also experienced something similar. And the man who was stalking her in that case did plead guilty to a stalking charge. Um, and so it's concerning and it's troublesome as the WNBA, as women's basketball starts to grow, these players with these very big profiles, uh, there's security concerns around them, and I'm sure it will only continue. And so, obviously, it's something the league will have to address. But what were your initial thoughts to this, Callie? Because I know I see social talking about it, and to me, I don't really think this is time to be trying to declare wars on. Oh, you talk about this player, you don't talk about this player. I don't want this happening to any woman, man, person, anything. I want all of the players to feel safe and protected. And Caitlin Clark, obviously being one of the most high profile players in the league, I actually, while I hate that this happened to her, I hope something like this brings more attention to this really harmful issue in our society. And also, uh, probably, I'm sure the Fever, other teams around the league, and the WNBA will look to even increase their security measures, Callie.
Yeah, I mean, I think what stood out to me about this specific situation with Caitlin Clark and this 55-year-old man is that, when he was apprehended by the police and questioned about the situation, because these messages ranged from like last month to just a few weeks ago, even a lot of like public social media activity from him that was also concerning. And when asked about it, he was like, "It's nothing. It's a public, an imaginary relationship," he said. And it's really absurd to kind of like hear something like that and the thought process of like an imaginary relationship with someone you don't know who you've made fear for their safety, and like you mentioned, alter their public appearances out of fear. And in some ways I am relieved to see kind of how swiftly, I mean, it seems like, this started like mid-December. It could have been quicker, but seeing the way that, there were multiple responses, like the the FBI got involved with this, which
Yeah.
is crazy. Reading that, and they were even more concerned when he'd arrived in Indiana, as you mentioned, he messaged her that he'd been driving around her house 3 times a day, and then try to amend it and say, like, don't call the law. It's allowed because I'm at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, aka Caitlin's Fieldhouse. But like, she's known to that's somewhere where she like trains and attends games and things like that. And so I saw that officials thanked the Pacers ownership group for being so active and responsive. He's been banned from Gainbridge Fieldhouse and some other arenas where Caitlin might appear. And so those are the things that you are relieved to see, but it's so discouraging to hear about a case like this. Like you mentioned, the context of it's January, and this is a significant time for awareness for situations like this, but also this isn't uncommon for women in sports, and that's the part that concerns me the most. Like, a story that I read from NPR about this situation mentioned that obviously Caitlin Clark like skyrocketed to fame during a couple years ago, the NCAA tournament, and after that the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, spoke to a Senate committee, and he said that he talked to a lot of women who appeared in that tournament that was so obviously, beneficial for people like Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, but also harmful because of like the raise in attention. And he said that, speaking with a lot of the players who participated, the stuff that comes in on their DMs is a lot worse than what we see on their public handle. That's what he said. So it's like just a reminder that even if these players are not speaking about what's happening, or if it doesn't reach to the point now where we're reading like public documents from, officials, like, this is not an uncommon issue. You spoke about the 40-year-old man who was arrested and pled guilty to stalking Paige Bueckers. That's a similar situation where he traveled to Connecticut. So it's really concerning to see that like these people who, whatever they have going on, are willing to like act on some of the concerning things that they'll say. Like, that's really
And
nerve-wracking.
found out like where her family members, her mother, I believe, in the Paige Bueckers incident resides. That's scary because like now you're extending to family. And you're right, like this comes up a lot for women in sports, but really it comes up a lot for women. And I'm not trying to take away from Caitlin or Paige or anyone. This is a woman's experience. And because they're in sports, it's of a higher profile. And, when you said like this started, it wasn't that long ago, and he sort of like told the police, uh, oh, like it's an imaginary relationship or whatever. It made me think, because we've had a lot of conversations in the WNBA around online bullying and harassment and different things. And the sentiment was often like, well, how can that be controlled? And you just have to ignore what people are doing. This situation started as someone who was online, and you could probably say, just ignore the person, right? And yes, it escalated, but that's the thing. You never know when these situations are going to be escalated. And I mean, again, we're here to talk about the players and tell their stories, but Callie, we experience it as women who cover this sport. Vile, really crazy things being sent to us. We've seen other stories of women who are covering sports and people stalk them. They've had to get restraining orders and things like that. When people sometimes think we're overreacting or we might be in fear of something, I don't think they realize how real it is. And you're right. Many times we don't tell people. I've closed my DMs. But there's a lot of really vile things that are emailed and said to women who play the game, who work in this area, and just it's the product of being a woman. It's unfortunate we have to live like this. So I really, Caitlin is so young, Paige is so young, and Angel
even
Reese.
Angel Reese, yeah, that's somebody like
Go ahead, talk about Angel.
The first episode of her podcast back in September, she was asked by her co-host about about Caitlin Clark, and of course, Angel said so many things about Caitlin Clark. But then, later in that conversation, she mentioned that she has had like harassment and death threats, people following her home, people fabricating naked pictures of Angel Reese through AI and then sending them to her family, this is what Angel Reese felt prompted to talk about when asked about that situation. And I think part of that too is just because, like I was talking about with the NCAA tournament, that just raised everything to such a higher profile. And Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark were such a huge part of that. So I think maybe that was kind of the process and how Angel Reese brought that up. And that's not even including, like, you think about Kennedy Carter last season. A lot of players on the Sky spoke about an incident where Kennedy was targeted racially
Yeah,
when they were
Angel
trying.
was vocal about it on X.
Yeah. And she wasn't the only one on the team. And I think that kind of segues me to my next point that really stood out to me from one of the police officers, who, I'm not sure like where this quote came from, but he basically said that like it's so important that Caitlin Clark did speak to officials.
Yes.
Because a lot of times women will not, because they're scared that they won't be believed. And I think that really, really stands out to me when you were talking about how this is
Or
something that,
dismissed as well.
yeah, exactly, or will be dismissed. And I think that, when you were talking about women, everyday women like you and I, like, or whatever, there are so many times where like I have never spoken about some of the emails and messages that I've received, and probably will not, because it's just like it doesn't feel like it's something that'll be received well, you know what I mean? And so sometimes it's like that's just a battle that you got to find on your own, and I know that you've dealt with it too. So I think that, I hate that, but I do appreciate that someone like Caitlin Clark at least spoke to officials and stuff like that. And also, I saw a
And
lot
it
of people.
doesn't seem like it was something she wanted to share, which is not
Yeah,
which is not a good feeling. Like we should not be going around having to feel like that,
yeah,
right? But it got to a certain level where she had to, and I'm really glad she did.
yeah,
Um, I don't know if she'll ever like speak on this publicly. We know Caitlin really picks and chooses what to speak on and how vocal to be about things. But I hope she does, because I think it would be really empowering for a lot of women.
yeah. I understand that sentiment. I like, to me, and this is something I've stood on. Like I don't, like you said, I feel like I've come to understand Caitlin Clark's, like, the way that she, operates and talks about certain things. And this is not something that I expect her to talk about, or like would want her to talk about, because of, like you said, the way that we've seen her kind of avoid stuff like that. And I think that's okay. I think like the
Yeah,
fact
I
that she's so
wasn't like
yeah,
criticizing her for that.
yeah. I
I,
think
I think so many people look up to her, and
yeah,
especially like a lot of young women. And so when I say that, I don't know, like she's dealing with so much other stuff, right? Like she is the, most popular player in the world. She has constant media attention, scrutiny. She's young. She's dealing with a lot. So she has to like manage all those things. And obviously she can't speak on everything and everything be a cause for her. But so if she never does, I would never think anything of it. Paige has never spoken about it either. And I hope one day maybe she'll feel comfortable to do it. When I say I hope they speak about it, I'm saying that from a place of just being a woman and understanding that oftentimes the reasons we often choose not to speak on these things is not because it wouldn't help us. It's because of like how we think others may react to it, and I don't again, it would be in line with what Caitlin Clark has showed us about her personality not to. So I wouldn't even think twice of it. But if she does, again, I would, you know, I I would like to, know if, like, does she feel safer now that like this man has been arrested? There was a hearing today, right, Callie?
yeah. He was held on bail. He's facing up to 6 years in prison, maybe $100,000 fine. And I wonder, I mean, it's a great question. Does something like that make you feel safer? I think another big question for me is like, how how do the institutions that these women in sports are involved with do a better job to protect players? That's, we're talking about protecting players at all costs. Like, how do we improve that in the WNBA, in the NCAA? Like, what has to change? And maybe it's not like, maybe there's nothing that can be done. Obviously, we're seeing that like these situations happen and have happened for so long to women, but is there anything that can be done that we can improve that situation?
Well, I can talk a little bit to the leagues, the WNBA specifically, their current protocols. League security actively monitors threat-related activity and works directly with teams and arenas to take appropriate measures, including working with local law enforcement as necessary. So it sounds like those protocols are in place already, and that's probably what led us here, most likely. And then there's league security, but all 12 teams have dedicated security that are team employees or contractors. And the league has security reps in each market and at all games who are a resource and contact for any player team security issues. And also, once when they implemented the charter program, they mandated that all teams travel with security. And you remember we saw that image of Caitlin in the airport earlier this year, and she had already had her own security from Iowa. But also, we remember an incident a couple of years ago with Brittany Griner and someone harassing her at the airport. So we've been having conversations about player safety already, and the league is probably the league and the teams will probably just have to beef it up more. And I'm sure it's something we can find out from the Fever, like if they've taken, additional precautions and things like that. I'm sure they had. I'm sure even before this incident, they had to have had all year with the unprecedented attention, around a player like Caitlin Clark. We know the Chicago Sky did as well. They had security with them, like you mentioned, with that incident with Kennedy Carter. And I mean, even if you remember at the beginning of the season, Angel talking about like someone who like ran up on her car and was like banging on the window. And I think it was actually a woman. It was like a fan, like she's like, better act like something like you better act like you're from Chicago or something along those lines. And Angel's just like, it just caught her off guard. And like when she told the story, she was laughing about it, but it's sort of like, I was like a little nervous because like I don't know who this person is and I don't know the area that well because it's like she's brand new. This is back in May. And I remember calls of like, I appreciate like Angel's demeanor around this, but we need to get her some security. So I think everyone recognizes that these players need
And I guess one thing
security.
I should note too, like you mentioned a lot of security. To me, Asia Wilson's security is like notorious. A lot of people will see him.
Oh, yes.
And like I would see him like every game day.
He be ruining my videos when I'm trying to get her walking
and
down like, bro, can I just let her walk?
And one thing I will say about that is like, it just to maybe give some more context to this conversation. There was a time where like I wanted to write a story about him because I would see him all the time. He's friendly but intimidating, you know what I mean? And I was talking to Ace's media relations and I'm like, can I write a story about him? And they were like, no way. Like him being like private, like people don't even want his name out there, which I completely respect and understand. So I'm like not going to put it out there, but
that's part of the protection process.
That's part of the protection. So I think maybe that will help. I mean, kind of like some perspective. Talking about everything that like might be done to protect these players is maybe not something that's supposed to be public knowledge for all of us, and that's something that I need to keep in mind, and maybe we all need to keep in mind. But that just reminds me.
I don't think we want to know details. I think we just want to know that the league and the teams are taking measures, right? And right. I mean, I think is.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm just saying, I mean, like, it's my nature, and probably a lot of people should just be like, what exactly? Like, how can we feel safe? How can we feel safer for these players? You know what I mean?
Right.
But like, we might not necessarily get there is kind of what I'm trying to couch. Like, we might get the guidelines like you said, and I think that was really important to include, basically just saying like, these are some of the things that they do, but there might be more than what we know.
And it's an excellent point that you make, that you don't want to risk the safety by revealing too much. So we have to be thoughtful about what we ask, but also understanding when we maybe can't get more information and not assume that they're just being derelict, but it's for the player safety. Because if you recall, when things first happened with Brittany Griner's detainment in Russia, and when we did finally find out, when it was, the news first broke, people were like, wait, she's been there for how long? And we're just learning about it. And apparently that was the initial like instruction for people not to talk about it. And so again, there's, reasons why things sometimes occur and people don't always know, and we shouldn't always jump to speculate. It's a good reminder for all of us.
Yeah.
Well, I hope Caitlin feels safe, because sometimes when someone makes you feel unsafe, an arrest alone or certain things, it doesn't make you feel safe again. And the worst feeling in the world is to feel unsafe in your space, in your surroundings. I like as a woman, Callie, I know you know what I'm talking about, and it's not to suggest that men don't, but I don't know that some men can understand what that's really like for us, and it takes a while. You know, I had an incident that really made me feel unsafe, and I didn't like leave my home for like a while. You know, I did not feel safe. And so it's not something that I would ever wish on anyone. And so I hope she does feel safe. I hope she feels protected. And I hope that she gets to go back to living the life someone of her age should be living. I hope Paige feels safe. I hope Angel is feeling safe, and I hope all the players are. You know, it's obviously something that's going to be an ongoing thing, so we just have to continue to watch it and discuss as needed and call attention to it. But thank you for talking with me today, Callie. Really important discussion to have.
Thank you.